We might be a small island, but we've got an epic history. And there's a wealth of untold secrets still to uncover. So every year, hundreds of archaeologists dig, dive, and sift to find clues.
Absolutely
Never seen anything
like it before.
It's just amazing.
In 2018, their discoveries have been more exciting than ever.
Look at that.
So that's from a tank then? That's brilliant. That's a nice find.
Not bad for day 2.
Not bad at all.
Each excavation has been filmed as it happened by the archaeologists themselves. Their dig diaries mean that we can be there for every exciting moment of discovery.
And you imagine him looking over his shoulder, trying to get away from the enemy aircraft through that.
I'll be in the lab where the teams will bring in their finds from pottery and metalwork to human remains, and we'll take a closer look to find out what these new digs can tell us about our ancestors. Look at that.
Be very careful.
I will be careful. Oh my goodness. While archaeologist Raksha Dave looks into the analysis that goes on long after a dig is finished.
Somebody stabbed her in the back of the head. What an awful way to go.
Welcome to Digging for Britain. In this programme, I'm joining archaeologists in the north of the country to share in their biggest discoveries.
Yes!
We go on a hunt for a lost Spitfire from the Second World War.
The instrument panel. No! Yeah?
That is new star find.
And we follow the excavation of a recently identified Anglo-Saxon cemetery with some very unusual grave goods.
That's quite some bling.
I've come to the National Museum of Scotland to see how these discoveries are rewriting British history, and I've been given behind-the-scenes access to explore parts of the collections rarely seen by the public. I'll have the chance to get up close and personal with some of Britain's most intriguing treasures. Our first dig takes us to Dumfries and Galloway in southwest Scotland, and the Black Loch of Merton, where a perfectly preserved 2,500-year-old village is emerging from the mud. Moving back into prehistory, it is very rare to find actual evidence of the houses our ancestors lived in. Timber rots away, and very often all that we have left are imprints in the ground. But the amazing wetland preservation at Blackloch means that we have a chance to see what village life in Britain was really like 2,500 years ago. Back in 2016, Digging for Britain got privileged access as a team of archaeologists unearthed a remarkable lost village. From out of the mud, they revealed intriguing sections of wood that had been skillfully crafted into planks, and they were in incredible condition.
Wow, that's amazing. So this is the notch that's been cut to fit around the lower framework?
Yes!
All right.
Well done.
The finds were so spectacular that we're joining them again as they return to this prehistoric Pompeii for their 5th season. Archaeologists Anne Crone and Graham Cavers have been the site directors from the very beginning.
We've got lots of Iron Age sites throughout Scotland, but to have this level of preservation on a site of this date is very rare indeed, and I would say that it's probably a once-in-a-lifetime chance to excavate under these conditions.
Using the remains of the roundhouses dug up over the last 4 seasons, the archaeologists have built up a detailed picture of the village, and they discovered that these homes once sat on the peaty edge of a loch that had been drained in the 19th century. It's an extraordinary window into Iron Age life. But so far, they haven't found any personal possessions. And this year they're going to dig where they think they're most likely to find them: inside the houses. They soon make a remarkable discovery. An intact floor made of woven rushes and withies. This is ancient matting.
It looks like chipboard. It's so fresh. It's just layer upon layer of brush, sedges, reeds and things like this, which have just been compacted down.
The discovery of the matting gives us an incredible opportunity to glimpse the skills of our ancient ancestors and their efforts to insulate their homes and make them cosy in these inhospitable conditions. And now they've got a floor surface, there's a tantalising prospect that they may find personal items. They eventually make a breakthrough.
And what is it?
I have no idea. It looks like it's a piece of spindle-turned wood.
Anne has found an intriguing piece of clearly worked wood.
Oh, wow. Has it got a hole? It's got a hole there.
Never seen anything
like it before.
That's amazing.
We're just removing the very sort of thick layer of laminated flooring materials. I was about to start pickaxing, and this is just lying on one of the surfaces within this house.
Discovering what this artefact is could give the team valuable insights into daily life at Blackloch. And then there's another extraordinary find in a rubbish pit located next to one of the houses.
Oh wow, I can see the decoration.
Extremely rare.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
My heart actually skipped a bit when I saw it.
This exquisitely decorated wooden object was found deep in the pit.
That's the rim here. So you've got two pieces and then one piece that goes this way. And then here is the rim on the other side.
Although squashed flat and in several pieces, the team knows what this is. It's a beautiful and rare lathe-turned wooden bowl.
Well, this has to be the star find of the entire 5 years of excavation so far.
The team's discoveries have given us an unprecedented new insight into the lives of the people who lived here at Blackloch. It's been an extraordinary dig. I've asked Anne Crone into the lab to discuss her findings. And this site is just amazing. I mean, that preservation that you're getting and being able to see not just how the houses were constructed, but starting to find some of the artefacts of everyday life as well.
Most of the time it's been the preservation of the structural remains, but that's really changed this year when we started finding wooden artefacts for the first time. So, yeah. I know.
I mean, it looks so modern. I still find it hard to believe that this is a prehistoric artefact, but you're quite sure about the date of it.
Oh, absolutely. Well, it came out of very closely stratified deposits, and we have radiocarbon dated the deposit that it came from, and it's 2,500 years old.
That's just crazy.
Yeah. It's made of yew, which is a beautiful wood to carve. It's a spindle-turned object, so it's been sort of mounted with mandrels on either end there. It's very clearly designed for something, but I can only speculate as to what it is.
So these objects were just found in the floor. I mean, do you think that's just happened by accident?
No, I think these objects have been deliberately placed in the floor surfaces of this structure, possibly reflecting the function that the house has during its current phase. So perhaps if this is to do with weaving, that it was a weaving workshop during that phase.
And that's a beautiful bowl. So this is a turned bowl which has then been decorated.
Yeah. It's lathe turned. It's probably complete but flattened, and so what you're looking at is a reconstruction. It's an absolutely beautiful object. It seems to be unique in the UK at the moment. I've not heard of any other lathe-turned bowls. Its shape and the decoration, which is stunning, is really unusual. Never seen anything like that before. Until we found this, we didn't have very clear evidence for lathe turning in the Iron Age, but it's very clear from this bowl that not only were they doing it, but they've been doing it for a very long time, because this is so accomplished. Yes, so they're very good at it. And similarly with the baton as well.
How extraordinary to turn up those two objects, which, as you say, are utterly unique in Britain in one digging season. Yeah.
You wonder what else is out there. We're going to be able to look much more carefully at what's going on inside the houses, what sort of activities are taking place, and get closer to the people.
And how wonderfully close you got this year with that bowl and this, whatever it is, strange but very beautiful object.
Answers on a postcard, please.
Yeah. The dig at this very special Iron Age site allows us to see that our prehistoric ancestors were perhaps more technologically advanced than we've previously thought. Our next investigation takes us on the hunt for an RAF Spitfire lost on a World War II reconnaissance assignment. And it sheds light on a forgotten hero. On the 5th of March 1942, Flight Lieutenant Alistair Gunn took off from the RAF base at Wick in northeast Scotland. He was on a highly dangerous top-secret mission ordered by Winston Churchill, and it was a mission that he wouldn't return from alive. Gunn was tasked with monitoring the activity around the German battleship Tirpitz, which Hitler was using to intercept the Allied forces' merchant fleet. But only a few hours in, Alistair was shot down over the mountains near the Trondheim fjord in Norway. The Spitfire is arguably our most iconic fighter plane, famous, of course, for the role it played during the airborne conflict that was the Battle of Britain. But there is another side to the Spitfire's story. Reconnaissance Spitfires, like the one flown by Flight Lieutenant Alistair Gunn, played a vital role bringing key intelligence back to Britain. But these planes are now extremely rare. So finding this one would be a real coup. Nearly 80 years after it went down, aircraft engineer Tony Hoskins is driving all the way from Britain to Norway to lead the search.
It's the earliest model photo reconnaissance machine that was designed, so we know we're onto something really quite special here. So it is literally on the other side of that hill. I'm very excited.
With a team of historians, engineers and aviation enthusiasts, Tony hopes to find the exact spot where Gunn's plane crashed, bringing us close to the gritty realities faced by the RAF's brave reconnaissance pilots. It's a daunting task, and the team have only 3 days to find and recover the plane.
Anxious. Definitely anxious. It's 3 kilometres and about 1,000 metres climb, and of course we're coming back down with a significant amount of Spitfire.
Tony knows that Gunn's plane was shot down somewhere over these mountains, and he's narrowed down the location using German accounts and local reports to find the crash site.
I've just stood on a piece. There's more here, there's steel down there, it's just everywhere.
Luckily for the team, there's more wreckage than they'd ever hoped for.
This is the radiator door, and that's really lovely. Considering it's sat here for 76 years, that's in astonishingly good condition.
Suddenly, one of the team finds something that brings them even closer to Flight Lieutenant Gunn's final moments before he bailed out.
So this is a piece of the canopy, the perspex. So this was last looked through by Gunn, 5th of March 1942. And you imagine him looking over his shoulder, trying to get away from the enemy aircraft through that. Absolutely fantastic to find a bit of canopy.
Every piece that they salvage will help reveal how this particular Spitfire was stripped back and streamlined as a reconnaissance machine.
That's amazing.
Very good fun.
Incredible. Yeah, because that's almost the mount for its headrest. You can't get more in the cockpit than that.
Star item.
Because that is a brilliant piece.
Discover the past with exclusive ancient history documentaries and ad-free podcasts presented by world-renowned historians from History Hit. Watch them on your smart TV or on the go with your mobile device. Download the app now to explore everything from the wonders of Pompeii to the rebellion of Boudica and the mysteries of prehistoric Scotland. Immerse yourself in the captivating stories of this remarkable era by signing up via the link in the description.
With nearly 19 hours of daylight in Norway's summer months, Tony and his team could just keep digging, but they know they've got to leave enough time to carry the recovered pieces back down the mountain. The next morning, they're back.
This looks like the oxygen bottle.
1940 date on it.
These oxygen canisters allowed the reconnaissance pilots to fly higher than their fighter counterparts. The discovery of key reconnaissance items is a boost, but Tony soon realises that they need to widen the search area.
So we were hoping that a lot of it had gone bang into here, whereas it appears it's exploded and scattered over a wide area.
Although the team now have more ground to cover, the new search area pays dividends.
Shit.
There we go.
Well done.
Head on.
Instrument panel. Yeah. This is what they call the blind flying panel from the middle of the cockpit. This is the artificial horizon with its casing, so when you're flying in cloud he would be able to know whether he's banking, climbing or descending.
That is new star find. Alistair Gunn's blind flying panel. Very careful, that's the aeroplane portion. And that, oh look.
Artificial horizon?
Artificial horizon. What do you want to find? Say something directly relates to him. The instrument panel.
And it's in one piece. Can't believe that. I really can't believe that. Amazing, isn't it?
They're clearly delighted to have found such a recognisable fragment, the instrument panel from Gunn's cockpit.
Well, thank you very much. We've had a fantastic day. We've managed to get about 2/3 of what we found today off, but we think the new areas that we found around are going to continue to give.
It's the final day of the dig and the team have only hours left. But what they want more than anything, what for them is the Holy Grail, is the reconnaissance camera.
Oi! Wow!
What's this?
Oi!
This is maybe some electrical coil, maybe?
Tony.
This is interesting.
Cameras could be here. The writing on the top says heater, front, lens, camera. 14 and 20-inch lenses. That's right, camera f24. So it carried 14-inch lens.
Could you find the film, please?
Yeah.
We'd like to get it developed.
Yeah, no problem.
Finding the camera mount takes the team right to the heart of Gunn's mission. The photos taken by reconnaissance Spitfires played a key role in the Allies' success. But of course the photos from this camera, as Gunn himself, never made it back. I've invited Tony Hoskins and colleague Mark Hillier into the lab to take a closer look at this strategically important plane and to uncover the story of its brave pilot. Tony, I think the first question to ask is, how on earth did you know where to start looking for this Spitfire?
Well, it was a long process. We had the combat report from the German who shot him down, so we knew a rough area to start looking in, and then thankfully local knowledge proved to be the way forward. Although it's not a big aeroplane when you compare it to a mountain, it's going to be all in the same kind of area. It ended up being a bigger area than we thought, but we came away with 70% of the aeroplane.
So what are we looking at here? Which part of the aircraft is this from?
So this section is from the wing. So this is a wing skin on the top, and what's interesting about this part is that you can see the PR blue. So all the photographic reconnaissance aircraft at that time were painted in this for camouflage. Yeah. And this is the roundel, so the identity markings that he carried on the aircraft, just so that you didn't get any friendly fire. So obviously that's really important in terms of identifying it as British, and the colour is right as well for a photographic reconnaissance Spitfire.
And would they have been blue all over then?
The same colour, top surface and underside, were all blue, exactly that. Yeah. Some of the photographic reconnaissance aircraft later on were painted pink.
Where were they pink?
Desert mostly, wasn't it? Yeah, and
for the sunrise in the morning and the dust in the sky, it becomes pinky.
And it was stripped back in order to do this, was it?
That's right. I mean, they only built 220 of them, so it's a very rare item.
Yeah, they were unsung heroes if you think that they were often flying 4.5 hours, sometimes long sorties over water on their own, 30,000 feet, and unarmed. So obviously when they got to the target area, there's always the risk of enemy aircraft and being shot down, as Alistair found out to his cost.
Yeah. And you found not the camera itself, so this is a camera off another plane,
Yes.
presumably.
So it carried 3 cameras. It carried one that pointed out the side and 2 that pointed out the bottom.
Yeah.
And it was the very first setup for making 3D photographs, and that these would be mounted in a frame. And we've got the frame. That's the frame at the front.
So that is part
That's part of the frame that mounted the
actual
camera. Yeah. So that frame would have looped around the top up here.
Yeah.
And then Alistair would have set it in on a dial for the height that he was clear of cloud and could see the target, and then the cameras would have motored to give 2 angles that would have focused at the ground at that point.
Just how important was photo reconnaissance at this time?
I think people underestimate the importance of it if you think this was the intelligence gathering arm of all the armed forces. And even the RAF today, you know, photographic reconnaissance is really key and massively important.
And then you've got this amazing insight into the cockpit that Alistair was sitting in, and this is the housing for his instruments.
Really important piece of the cockpit, and also the engine instruments around to the right. But just to think that he was in the cockpit, you know, in 1942, the last person looking at those instruments. This is part of the fuselage, and it's just from the cockpit section, just about where Alistair was sat, and the machine gun round has come through the cockpit, and this is the exit point from the side of the fuselage. It tells quite a grim story of the last few moments of his struggle to get away from the Germans. And then, obviously, eventually, he lost that fight and had to bail out of the aircraft.
So he bails out, he parachutes, he survives this. What happens to him eventually?
He'd spent a night in a hut on the hill on the night of the 5th, and then, despite the help of the locals, he took the decision it was best to hand himself in. Eventually, he was sent to Stavaglov 3, which was the camp made famous in the film The Great Escape.
Yeah.
And he got involved with the tunnelling committee and dug first one tunnel, which was discovered by the Germans, and then embarked on a second rather famous tunnel, which was the Tunnel Harry.
But did he make it out?
He did escape in the tunnel, but they got to within 25 kilometres of the port they were going to use to get to Sweden when he was discovered. He was writing letters home to his parents, and sadly his last letter he wrote was on the 19th of March, 44. Of course, he escaped on the night, the 24th, 25th, and the letter arrived at his parents' house on the 15th of May. But sadly, the next day, on the 16th of May, was the telegram from the War Office saying that he'd been executed.
That's just horrendous. I mean, he astonishingly brave.
They're often forgotten about, so this story is really important. Not just Alistair's, but all of the PRU pilots too. That's fantastic.
That's the thing, isn't it? It's not just about going and recovering pieces of metal from the side of a mountain. It's about recovering this story and remembering him. The discovery of this Spitfire by Tony and his team has graphically underlined just how risky these vital reconnaissance missions were. The fragments of Alistair Gunn's plane, recovered from that Norwegian mountainside, are a memorial to just one of World War II's forgotten heroes. Our next investigation takes us to the Roman fort of Vindolanda in Northumberland. Vindolanda is near Hadrian's Wall, the northernmost frontier of the Roman Empire. For almost 300 years, its numerous forts were key to the stability of military rule in this inhospitable and dangerous no-man's land. Roman sites are invariably rich in finds, but very few in Britain have delivered the sheer range of artefacts that we've found at Vindolanda, from swords to sandals and even handwritten notes from the soldiers themselves. Now, people have been digging at Vindolanda for decades, revealing the rich and layered history of the Romans in Britain. But can this year's dig uncover fresh insights about a particularly turbulent episode during those centuries of Roman rule? This summer, archaeologists have been digging into the ditches, Vindolanda's frontline defences, where the discoveries have been spectacular.
Look at that beauty.
And it's all down to the anaerobic conditions in this soil. Behind the scenes, post-excavation work is transforming our knowledge of one of the most turbulent times in the history of Vindolanda, the 2nd century Civil War. Archaeologist Raksha Dave is getting a privileged look at the conservation work taking place during this year's digging season.
Every archaeologist dreams of working on a site like Vindolanda. Each object that's uncovered is so precious that it makes their post-excavation labs like the emergency rooms of archaeology. Each object needs conservation immediately, or else its secrets could be lost forever.
I'm going to follow the process of conservation from start to finish. But while I wait for something to turn up in the trenches, I've met up with Site Director Andrew Burley to find out more about this year's mission.
Andrew, what are you actually concentrating on this year?
Well, we're focusing at the end of the 2nd century and the beginning of the 3rd century, when we have a Roman army in Britain trying to suppress rebels, but they're also fighting amongst themselves. In the ditches, we're getting evidence of things that are tossed away during that very brief but intense period of time. And it's a little sort of Vindolanda Pompeii, because it's only occupied for a few years, but everything is sealed, so it's giving us a lovely slice of life.
Back in the trenches, the digging team make a discovery in the 2nd century Antonine ditch. So Andrew and I head over to see what they found.
Oh, I can actually see it now, so I can see the
soul coming
this way.
bending around. That's it. There it is.
Yay!
Another Roman shoe at Vindolanda.
There was a bit of a shoe the other day, but this is the first complete one. Fantastic feeling. Thrown away by somebody 1900 years ago. Fabulous to find it.
Now the shoe is out of the ground, every second counts. So I'm taking it over to Barbara Burley in the Vindolanda Conservation Lab. She's going to show me what happens next.
Shall we open it up and have a look?
Yeah, I'm really excited to have a look at it, actually.
Probably a man's shoe by initial inspection. Wow, look at that. And you've even got the heel strengthener just here. Shall we get it washed up and have a look at it?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Barbara separates the very fragile shoe from its mud cocoon, using a soft brush and water.
So you do this process almost immediately?
We try to do it as fast as we can because they will continue to degrade until we put them into some sort of chemical bath, especially the organic objects like the leather.
Barbara has given me a Charles shoe to clean. I don't normally get a post-excavation opportunity, so I'm looking forward to this.
Am I using just cold water or can I use hot as well?
We don't want it to be too hot because that could actually kind of shock leather.
Right, okay.
Here it goes. The next step is to put them in these mesh bags that we've got. We use these bags in order to keep any sort of little bits that come off of it into the bucket here.
It is then preserved using a cocktail of chemicals, including acetone, which stabilises the leather. The whole process takes over 5 hours, but once completed, the shoe will be preserved for posterity and go on show in the museum with some of the other remarkable finds from the excavations. Back at the fort, I meet with Andrew to find out more about the recent shoe discoveries in the ditches.
So what do the shoes tell us about this particular period of conflict?
If we look at all of them together, and there's almost 1,000 of them now from this particular period, 45% are non-adult male shoes. In other words, they're children, they're women, they're teenagers, and that just changes the whole nature and the complexion of what was going on, what it was like to be part of this community.
It's really hard to imagine that those women and children would have seen exactly the same horrors as the men that were stationed here.
Some of the things they will have seen are horrendous. We have evidence here of people who've had their heads cut off and mounted on poles on the ramparts, and if you're a little child running around, that's the kind of thing that you're going to see.
The analysis of these shoes has given us a fresh understanding of the people who lived here at Vindolanda during those turbulent years. And it's given us a new take on the horrors endured by the inhabitants of this fort at the time.
Our next dig takes us to Scremby on the tip of the Lincolnshire Wolds, and a discovery which could fill in some gaps about what we know about Britain after the Romans left, a period sometimes known as the Dark Ages. Around 1500 years ago, so history tells us, Britain was invaded by wave upon wave of Germanic tribes, the Angles, the Saxons, the Jutes, and they transformed our country, giving us the English language and the basis of our laws. But actually, there is very little in the way of written records from the time. So if we want to understand Anglo-Saxon society and its cultural connections, we have to turn to archaeology. And this next excavation gives us a chance to find out more. Last year, local landowner and metal detectorist Jim Hoff was exploring fields next to his home where he came across some rare and intriguing objects. A small team of archaeologists from the University of Sheffield started to investigate, and it wasn't long before they uncovered some graves dating to the late 5th, early 6th centuries, packed with jewellery and other precious goods. The discovery was so rich and so intriguing that this year they're returning for a full excavation led by Hugh Wilmot.
Here we are at Scremby, and let's go and look at the site. So one of the questions we've got here is, the people who are buried here, were they born here in Lincolnshire? Are they sort of second-generation migrants? Or perhaps their ancestors have always lived here and they've just adopted new styles and fashions of the incoming Anglo-Saxons? And these are all questions we can hopefully answer from the grave goods they've been buried with, but also some of the science we can do back in the lab.
Analysing the skeletons and the objects buried with them should provide insights into whether these people were British natives or immigrants. The team has stripped a large area and have already identified a number of graves in the ground.
Possibly there's the fill of another grave coming through here.
After last year's dig, they're expecting some great finds from the site, and they're not disappointed.
It's the second day, and we've just started excavating some of the graves. And here we've got one leg running down here, quite a large femur there. And lying right next to it here is a huge spearhead. And it dates to about 525 to about 550 AD. And this largest kind of spear you're going to see in the Anglo-Saxon world.
As the team targets some of the other graves, they are rewarded with even more exotic finds.
We have this pretty well-preserved skeleton of an adult female. Down at her hip, she's got the remains of an ivory bag ring, and this went round the mouth of a sort of fabric bag that would have hung from her hip. And inside it are all sorts of artefacts.
Ivory was a rare commodity in Anglo-Saxon Britain, but this isn't the first ring to be uncovered here.
We found one elephant ivory bag ring last year, and already, just over a week into the dig, we found two more. So what stage are we at with this one, Megan?
Well, we're going to lift the copper brooch and this other tube bead,
Right.
and then the girdle hanger.
Oh, wow. I think that's the nicest one we've got so far.
After 1,500 years in the ground, the ring is extremely delicate.
Beautiful. Well done. Good job, team.
And now lifted, it'll be sent to the lab for analysis.
So one of the things we can do, which is quite simple, is radiocarbon date the elephant ivory to see how old it is. Now, if it's sort of 6th century in date, it probably tells us it's coming from Africa. But if it ends up being sort of 10,000 BC, they must be reusing mammoth ivory, so that's quite an easy one to test out.
And pieces of exquisite jewellery are turning up in further female graves.
Now James has got a bead here, a very, very fine little amber bead.
Sources of amber are rare in Britain, but they're finding a surprising amount of this material here.
We've nearly finished excavating this burial here, and it has a young lady in it, and on her forearm is the skeleton of a baby. Placed upon both the mother and the baby were a large quantity of beads. So far we've got nearly 500 of them. It's really quite extraordinary.
Many of these female skeletons are buried with elaborate bead necklaces.
That's quite some bling.
It's been a successful excavation, and with so many intriguing discoveries, what can the archaeologists tell us about these people and their bling? I've asked Hugh Wilmot into the lab to give me some answers. Hugh, this is an astonishing site, and it is completely new. Nobody knew it was there.
No, absolutely. There hasn't been a cemetery in this location recorded before. At first, we thought it's just going to be a standard sort of Saxon cemetery, but actually it's turned out to be rather more interesting.
And just extraordinary finds.
Amazing.
You've brought some of them in here, together with one of the skeletons. Are these finds that were actually found associated with this skeleton?
Yes, these are some, not all the finds that were found with this skeleton, but here are some of them, sort of the more diagnostic ones and some of the larger ones.
They seem to be very richly furnished graves.
They're extremely richly furnished. Of the 24 graves we excavated, only one had no artefacts in, which is a very unusual proportion.
So she would have been placed in the grave fully clothed then, with all her...
Oh, yes, absolutely.
With all her accessories. What's that? It looks like a little buckle.
Well, these are where the finds start getting a bit more special.
Yeah.
It's a very unusual design that you don't normally find in Lincolnshire.
Where do you normally find it, then?
Well, not many buckles like this have been found, but where they have been, they've been found in Kent or on the south coast of England.
Oh, really? So, yeah, quite some way away.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is that one of the amber beads?
It is. It's a small bead. They're quite simple, quite plain, but this is just one example of them, of which we had hundreds.
I mean, there seem to be extraordinary numbers in each grave, or at least some of the graves were just full of these beads.
Absolutely. It's clearly one of their sort of biggest fashion statements, these necklaces, and certainly the most visible thing.
And do we know where this amber has come from? Because obviously that's not local.
We do. 20 years ago, all these techniques for provenancing the amber, looking at the sort of ivory, you know, we couldn't do that, so you had to speculate. But now we can actually put some hard answers to some of these questions. And this comes from the Baltic, which is perhaps not unsurprising, because we know that the Baltic is a major supplier of amber.
And now, what about that ivory? Is that likely to have come along a similar reach, then, from Northern Europe into Northern Asia?
Well, that's an interesting question, because in the past, people have speculated that perhaps, because you've got an amber trade coming from the Baltic, that perhaps ivory was coming in the form of mammoth ivory from Siberia, where it's sort of preserved in the permafrost, and perhaps the same trade routes are bringing that ivory. But we've done radiocarbon dating on this ivory, and it's clearly contemporary to the Anglo-Saxon cemetery, so it must be an elephant.
Yeah, because mammoths weren't there at this time.
They've been extinct for 10,000 years.
Yeah.
So, you know, this has come from either Africa or maybe even India.
And what about the individuals themselves? Because you can provenance the amber and the ivory. There's a chance of provenancing these individuals. So do you have any results from that yet?
We do, and that's what's so exciting. Previously, we've kind of speculated where these people may have come from, whether they're perhaps, you know, locals who have adopted new fashions, or have they actually migrated from, you know, northern Germany, from Denmark. And we've done isotope analysis on this individual, and we came up with quite a surprising result. They're not from Lincolnshire, but they're not from further afield in terms of across the North Sea. This individual grew up on the south coast, Kent, perhaps around as far as Brighton, that kind of a region.
Really?
Yeah. So
I mean, isn't it extraordinary to have that level of biography of somebody?
Absolutely.
That you know that as a young girl she was living down in the southeast, and then she moved northwards and ended up in Lincolnshire.
Yeah.
For me, this is where she came from. She's wearing things still, which hark back to her childhood in Kent.
Absolutely, absolutely. So there's a memory that lingers.
Yeah. This new discovery at Scremby is revealing some wonderful detail of life in the Dark Ages, and it's allowing us to delve deeper into the cultural connections of our Anglo-Saxon ancestors across the British Isles and beyond. Our next dig diary takes us to the furthest reaches of northern Scotland and the remote island of Rousey in Orkney. The islands of Orkney are home to an abundance of well-preserved archaeology, and Rousey is no exception, having been nicknamed the Egypt of the North. But its sites are often troubled by more than their fair share of bad weather, with aggressive tides causing erosion along the coastline. But sometimes with destruction comes discovery. In 2010, winter storms revealed a line of stones on a beach, and archaeologists realised that they could be looking at the first signs of an ancient monument dating right back to Britain's earliest civilization, perhaps even a new jewel in Orkney's crown. This summer, the team is back on site for their 8th season, and they're led by Steve Dockrell and Julie Bond from the University of Bradford. Orkney is peppered with incredible prehistoric sites, and the team already believe that they've found something very special here on Rousey, a Neolithic tomb dating back more than 4,000 years. Photos taken just a few years ago show the circular walls of the monument.
The way they built these tombs was to build up concentric walls of stone. So you end up with a kind of a big mound, and over the years you end up with something like a green hill.
But these rings have now been reduced to rubble. Much of the monument has already been destroyed by the sea.
It's heartbreaking that we're watching this thing disappear, but it gives us an opportunity to excavate and to pick this apart and to really understand how these were built.
This golden opportunity should provide invaluable clues into the monument's construction and use over time, before it is lost to the waves forever.
Well, this is the second day of uncovering the chambered tomb. We're a little bit worried as to how much is still left. Although this passage is still here, it looks from the angle as if some of the lower parts might have disappeared.
Once they've removed the protecting stones laid over the site, the team are down to the well-built walls of the tomb.
The wall goes off down onto the beach, curves around in a huge arc and comes back again. This seems to be the doorway.
And as they dig through into the passageway, the archaeologists uncover some tantalising clues as to the tomb's internal construction.
My Lord! Wow, look at that! That's huge! As they've gone back into this area here, enormous great stones have appeared, and they are absolutely massive. We're talking about something before they broke that would be about this wide. So that's got to be roof of something, a lintel from something, which is really interesting.
These huge slabs would have spanned the width of the passageway, and they remind us that our Neolithic ancestors were skilled engineers. The team wants to locate the central area of the tomb, so this year they've been given an opportunity to move further landward. But it's already thrown them a monumental curveball. As the team excavate down through the mound's central top layers, they come across evidence that just doesn't add up. Someone seems to have made this tomb into a home.
Well, this is the surprise this year. This is the thing we didn't quite expect. It looks like we've got an Iron Age house right in the top of the tomb. You can see there's a series of upright stones going round in an arc, and then there's another wall, quite a big wall, coming round this way as well.
This new evidence suggests that the Neolithic tomb, which housed the dead over 4,000 years ago, then became a home to the living 2,000 years later. The new circular feature indicates that this is an Iron Age roundhouse constructed deep into the central parts of the monument. The insertion of this younger building into the original structure is a revelation for the archaeologists, who now believe that this wasn't the only new build in the area. In another trench, just yards from the tomb's entranceway, the tomb have uncovered yet another stone-built structure, and it has a surprising array of features.
Look at it. Yes!
This is architecturally very characteristic of a Pictish building which is roughly 500 to 900 AD. We've got a staircase that leads down and into the building. We've got a central hearth, but crucially around it as well, we've got really black layers filled with charcoal and other material, and 2 anvil stones set next to the hearth.
Remarkably, what the archaeologists have discovered is a Scottish Iron Age or Pictish blacksmith's workshop, over 1,000 years old. And as they dig the final layers, they uncover evidence of early and extremely rare industrial activity, including copper working.
We would expect all settlement sites to have evidence of blacksmithing, but to find a building that is a dedicated coppersmith's workshop is exceptional. We would normally only expect to find such a site in very, very high status sites and in larger urban settlements.
As the team records the final sections of the smithy, they get one more surprise. There are greasy finger stains on one of the anvil stones, an incredible link straight back to the blacksmith who worked in this building over 1,000 years ago. I've asked Julie Bond and Steve Dockrell into the lab to tell me more about this extraordinary place. This is such an incredibly complicated site.
We have dug sites in the Northern Isles before, so we knew they were complex, but this is an order above, I think.
What is amazing about this site is that it was a real hotbed of activity.
I think it must have been a very busy place, and the archaeology there is quite remarkable. We get settlement build up for these long periods of time.
And what about the reuse of this Neolithic tomb? It seems very odd that Iron Age people should come along and just want to build their houses into the side of it.
It may be because it's a ready source of dressed stone. It may also be something to do with identity and ownership of that part of the landscape.
Maybe they have an interest in what's gone before.
That it's not just about using the stone,
No.
that they're close to the ancestors, perhaps?
Close to the ancestors.
And then you've got evidence of metalwork.
This is probably part of the tuya, which is basically usually a piece of stone or a block of clay that you put the bellows through. It's to protect the bellows from catching fire.
Right.
So that you can pump air into your hearth to get the temperature up high.
Yeah.
So we actually know where the smith was sitting and where the person working the bellows was sitting in that little building.
Yeah, yeah.
See how they've lived their lives in those places,
And see where people have kneeled.
Yes.
I mean,
That's right.
I was amazed by that.
Yes,
that must be a
it's
very
absolutely
rare
fantastic,
find
isn't it?
indeed.
I mean, you can see those fingerprints there, and you can see these carbon splodges where we think the smith would have been kneeling up against it.
Yeah.
This is a beech cobble that's been used as a hammerstone, and they're incredibly strong. So they make ideal anvils.
Yeah.
And we only found these finger marks when we cleaned it. It was totally invisible when we were excavating it.
How have they survived?
It would have been dark, the metal would have been glowing, it would have been hot, smoky, lots of carbon, lots of sweat.
So kind of grease and soot together, staining the stone.
I don't think I've ever had quite such a vivid understanding of how somebody used a building.
We can actually piece together exactly how people operated. So that's quite an unusual thing for archaeology, to be able to place people into it.
The sort of place that people coming to Orkney would have heard about, would have known about.
Would have known about.
It was a highway. It was a gateway to the Atlantic going out.
Go that way and that's all you have in front of you.
Yes.
Is the Atlantic. Turn left and you're heading towards the rest of Scotland and down through the islands towards Ireland. Turn right.
You're heading to Scandinavia.
Yeah.
And of course that was so important in the Viking period.
This gateway works both ways because the Vikings, we know, were certainly settled nearby, possibly on this site, because first-generation Vikings were buried close to this site. And so it's a bit of a temptation, isn't it, if you're sailing past this wonderful site with the, with its own coppersmith and all these indications of wealth, and you're a Viking in a longship. Are you going to leave that alone?
These new discoveries on Rousey show that, far from being a remote group of islands, Orkney was a vibrant and busy hub which was occupied by wave after wave of people for thousands of years through prehistory. At the National Museum of Scotland, they have further evidence of this activity. The collection centre houses some 12 million objects, and amongst them is an artefact that speaks of the enduring importance of Orkney, sitting right at the centre of a maritime network that continues into the Viking period. The Westness brooch was found in 1963 in a Viking burial not far from the Neolithic tomb on Rousey. I've met with early medieval expert Dr. Adrian Maldonado, who's going to tell me more about this exquisite object. So Adrian, these objects all come from the same grave, and usually I'd be fascinated in these beautiful brooches, but they're slightly eclipsed by this amazing object.
Not only is this the best example of a brooch pin of its kind, the entire grave is the richest female Viking burial in Scotland. The technology of filigree, that sort of dotting of gold into beaded wire, that's something that we're getting from Anglo-Saxon metalwork at this time that is then adopted into Irish and Scottish metalworking. Here you can see the head of a kind of beaked creature, and then you have this amazing sort of wolf head, a sort of ferocious creature.
Yeah. Do we know anything else about her? Do we know where she came from? I mean, did she live in Orkney, or was she from elsewhere?
Now, this is an interesting thing. One of the things that they've been able to do is test the teeth of the females in the West Ness Cemetery to see whether they were local or not. And what's come out of this is that they're not from Orkney, but they're from somewhere in the British Isles, either from Eastern Britain, Lowland Britain, or Lowland Ireland.
So they're not local then?
People from outside Orkney are settling in Orkney at that time.
Yeah.
They're creating new settlements and sometimes sort of continuing older ones.
So Orkney was a great place to be. It was right at the centre of this Viking world.
Absolutely. If you're involved in long-distance sea trade, Orkney's where you want to be.
Discoveries like this from the Viking Age shows how archaeology can change the story of Britain and revise our understanding of life in the past. Our final dig takes us to the city of Salford, where archaeologists are delving into the heartland of Britain's Industrial Revolution to uncover the largest jail in Georgian England. The site of New Bailey Prison sits on the edge of the River Irwell, in an area linked to the heavy industrialisation of Salford, which began over 200 years ago. As Salford's industry boomed, its population expanded and crime increased. At its zenith, New Bailey Prison was the largest in the country, and it could hold 750 prisoners. Now, an excavation provides an unprecedented opportunity to find out what the lives of those prisoners were like during the Industrial Revolution. As part of a major regeneration of Salford, archaeologists are getting a chance to scrape back the centuries and reveal evidence of a radical new approach to crime and punishment. On site are a team from the University of Salford, headed by Rachel Reeder and Mike Novell. They are currently in their 5th and final year, and Digging for Britain has been following them all the way. The dig is focusing on the later 1820s extension of the prison, and preservation is looking good.
What we are seeing is how these buildings were actually built. The foundations are surviving 2, even 3 metres deep in places, which is brilliant.
And better yet is that these new discoveries aren't even documented on the plans.
All of this is below ground, so we certainly had no idea that this was here. We're finding those little bit of extras that kind of help tell the story about this site.
Further exploration of the foundations has uncovered hints that the prisoners may have been allowed some surprising creature comforts.
Oh, blimey. There it is. So we found what looks like the remnants of a heating system, which is very unusual, completely unexpected, not on the maps.
And Andy thinks he's discovered where the main boiler was positioned.
You have a staircase. So the stairs came down here. There's your access to your boiler house. This is probably part of the fire pit underneath the actual boiler itself. The heat would have gone up. There would have been flues going into the other cells.
And there's coke. It's a great indication what they're actually doing in there. Just further evidence that we've definitely got a heating system here.
And heating isn't what you'd expect to find in a prison of this age.
We know the really poorest working classes actually were being better fed and better looked after in this prison than they would be out in the industrialised slums in the 1840s.
But despite being heated, some of the cells became increasingly cramped.
This is probably no more than 2 by 2 metres. More than one person would have had to have slept in here, possibly up to 3 people at one point.
As the local population expanded and crime increased, the number of prisoners eventually became overwhelming.
Ultimately, the prison has far more people in it than it was originally designed for. This was recognised in the 1860s as being unworkable.
Hemmed in by urban developments, the prison couldn't expand, and it finally closed in 1868, making way for the larger prisons of an even more brutal Victorian age. I've asked Rachel Reeder and Mike Neville into the lab to discuss their discoveries and find out more about prison life at New Bailey during the Industrial Revolution. This is an incredible opportunity to excavate a prison which starts in the Georgian period and goes all the way through into the Victorian period.
The prison was built at a time of improvement and enlightenment. This is a new type of prison building. It's one of the first of its type in the UK.
And you discovered quite a lot that isn't on the plans. What was the most surprising thing about it to you?
I think the discovery of a heating system in the cells, which was completely unexpected, not on the plans.
And that's part of the flue, is it?
It absolutely is, yeah. So there were several of these kind of built up into a wall, and it would have basically directed the hot air from this boiler to the cells. How effective it was, we don't actually know, but we've got it, which was fantastic.
And in terms of what life was like for the prisoners, it can't have all been a bed of roses, surely, living in a prison like that.
It's not designed to be a bed of roses.
No, absolutely not. I mean, we know from the records that some of those that were sentenced to hard labour had to work on the treadmill, and we know that they were climbing around 20,000 feet a day. That's 2/3 the height of Everest. And now initially it was actually connected to a mill that kind of ground up wood for dye, which was kind of then passed out and sold to the local mills. But then it was disconnected eventually, so we know that they were climbing on that for absolutely no purpose whatsoever.
And what about the population in the prison? Who would have been there? What kind of cross-section of society?
We would have had men, women, we would have even had children in here. I think the records show that the youngest children we would have had would have been about 9, 10 years old.
Well, you have to remember that these are minor offenders. They're not mass murderers, they're not people who've committed a serious crime. It's petty theft, it's brawling in the streets, it's vagrancy. Now that means they're from the poorest part of the working population of Salford and Manchester. And we do have some comments from women bursting into tears when they are about to be released from the prison because they're faced with going back to those kind of slum conditions.
Yeah, and your excavations have shown that at least they were in a place which was, heated during the winter. This fascinating excavation has allowed us to go beyond the written record, uncovering a revolutionary and more human approach to the criminal system in the 18th century that's often hidden from view. From uncovering a lost World War II plane and the tragic story of its brave pilot, to glimpsing an incredibly well-preserved Iron Age village occupied over 2,500 years ago, we've been able to reach back through the centuries and touch the lives of our ancestors.